For more chat about geek entertainment, answers to your questions, and news from the wider world of Christian geekery, get the Christian Geek Central podcast today on iTunes and other podcast services. Hey guys, Peter Franson here from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions. Okay, so I'm going to try to give you my reactions now to most of the press events, the spotlights of different publishers and developers that went on during this kind of like E3 week. It's been interesting because last year without E3 there were a ton of little digital events spread all over the summer, and I thought there would be fewer of those. I think there actually were, but most of them, I think, still came back this year, except now they were just concentrated into this much shorter period of time. And I feel like, in general, they had less to show, at least in terms of the big AAA types of games. That's why this year I found myself not feeling like I needed to make a video to give Ubisoft its own video, to give the PC Gaming Show its own video, to give whoever else I'm going to talk about on this list here its own video. I felt like, I just highlight mainly the stuff that jumped out to me, and there wasn't near as much this year in each of these events, and so I decided I'll just do in one go my thoughts on most of the developers and publishers showcases. I say most because I've already commented on Microsoft and Bethesda before now, so you can go back to that if you want my thoughts on that. But let's start with Ubisoft. Just brief comments here. I'm guessing that with these AAA studios, the pandemic really has kind of slowed them down. It's either that, and it hasn't affected indie studios as much because maybe they were already working at home, or there's just a lot of smaller games showing up this year that wouldn't have shown up at all because a lot of these AAA games are kind of making room. But anyway, sorry, that's a bit of a rabbit trail. But Ubisoft didn't have much to update on. Their big game, if there was one that would appeal to me, was Far Cry 6. I mean, they had like some sports games and some, just non-geeky type stuff. Even Far Cry, in terms of its story genre, isn't quite geeky. It'll have some light fantasy elements, light supernatural elements now and then, but those are pretty rare, and sometimes, arguably brought about by drug-induced hallucinations. Anyway, Far Cry 6 was their big focus that interested me, but there wasn't a lot on gameplay. In fact, almost none. It was mostly focused on the villain that they were introducing, focused on the season pass, which is going to have shorter Far Cry experiences that actually allow you to play as the villains from 3 of the past Far Cry games, from Far Cry 3, 4, and 5. You get to play as those villains and kind of experience the world from their perspective and their origins or something, maybe. I'm not exactly sure what's going on there, but I doubt I will play that. But of all the ones that they've done, and season passes they've done for Far Cry so far, I would say that it probably most has my curiosity. And then, I really like Ghost Recon Breakpoint. All they really said about that was that more updates are coming soon. That's all fine. I really wasn't, on the edge of my seat needing more Ubisoft in my recreational time, because I've got plenty of Ubisoft that I'm really enjoying and not near finished with. So moving on to the PC Gaming Show, they really this year were going for kind of a Devolver style comedy narrative. And as a side note, Devolver Digital is known for their digital events. They're usually short 30-minute affairs that poke fun at games, the games industry and E3. They're kind of a smaller indie publisher, and they've done a great job of lampooning that in years past. This year, they kind of hit the reset button a little bit. You can watch it if you've enjoyed the past ones and see what you think of it. But I almost feel like they're jumping the shark a little bit. Like I wasn't finding it funny. I wasn't really laughing even infrequently like I have in previous years. And the PC Gaming Show is the first show that I'll mention that seems to be trying to do what Devolver did, going for these interstitial narrative things that the usual hosts are doing, but I prefer them as straight hosts rather than actors. I don't think acting is their strong suit, even, comedic sketch type comedy like this. It's not supposed to be really realistic and taken seriously. I just like them as hosts. I hope they go back to that next year. Let's see. Dying Light 2 was announced coming on December 7th, 2021 to PC and consoles. That's, zombie first person, I think, kind of survival thing. It's going to be too scary for me, so I won't play it. But it looks like it's well made. They Always Run is coming to Steam. It's a 2D action platformer with an upgrade system. It's just briefly worth mentioning to me because if it's a 2D action platformer with an upgrade system, I'm like, well, maybe anything that can be like Symphony of the Night can let me grind my way out of trouble. If I'm having too much difficulty, I can grind for experience and upgrades and stuff. So, it kind of caught my eye a little bit in that regard. Lemnis Gate. Now, this definitely isn't my type of game, but I think it's conceptually really interesting. This is described as a competitive turn-based first-person shooter. And so, you would rightly ask, as they do in the interview with the developer, what in the world is a turn-based first-person shooter? And the concept of the game revolves around being in a 25-second time loop. And each player, as you're going against each other, gets a turn of 25 seconds to go into the arena or the setting that you're in and try to accomplish your goal. And then all your activity for that 25 seconds is recorded, and then you jump back to the beginning of the time loop to play it again. But before you play through the time loop again, your opponent takes their 25-second turn, and as they are taking their turn, the recorded version of what you've done is in the world, is affecting the world, but they can do things to try and interrupt what you were doing on your turn using their turn, okay? Now it gets even crazier. When it comes back to your turn, you do yours again, but you add another layer because your first run is already recorded, is part of that world. It does not get erased, so you are adding a second layer, and maybe even using different characters with each layer, I'm not sure, but you bring a second character into that same 25-second time loop. So back and forth, you and whoever you're playing against are adding layers of characters into this same segment of time, over and over and over again, each trying to achieve your goals. And so just conceptually, it's super interesting to me. If you're more skilled than I am and interested in competitive play, you might want to check out Lemnis Gate and get more information on that one. Another game that's not my type, but I do like to promote it, is Tripwire Interactive's Killing Floor 2. They've got and the reason for that is the head of that studio is a very outspoken Christian and uses Christian death metal in the soundtracks for the Killing Floor games. And so I just like to point Christians to that as an example of, hey, if you're curious if Christians can find success in mainstream, in the mainstream games industry, here's at least one, John Gibson at the head of Tripwire Interactive, who has. So anyway, Killing Floor 2, the expansion is called Interstellar Insanity. That's coming to Steam, Epic, PS4, Xbox One on June 22nd. So coming up real soon here. Let's see. They also, in the PC Gaming Show, highlighted Steam NextFest, which I used last year as I was kind of reacting to E3 to check out a bunch of demos. Since there was no E3 last year, they made demos available for the average consumer as well as press people to download online and to check out. And so I'm going to be doing some of that again this year, and you can too if you want, June 16th through the 22nd on, I think it's store.steampowered, I don't know, if you just do like Steam video games in your search field, it'll take you to Steam. So anyway, yeah, June 16th through the 22nd. You can try a whole bunch of demos for games that are maybe still like a year and a half, 2 years out, and some that are coming much sooner than that. Soulstice is the name of this, and it's Soulstice, and I take it from the title and from kind of the dark aesthetic of the game that it's, and from a little bit of what I saw of the gameplay, that it might be a Souls-like game. I feel like these days, if you're gonna put Soul anywhere in the title, you are communicating to us that you are a Souls-like. And so this game, in terms of gameplay, probably isn't going to be for me, unless I'm mistaken in making that association. But thematically, it's interesting. You're playing like a character whose like sister is dead, and so you're like controlling both of them at the same time, and it just looks like it has some interesting ideas going on. But that's coming in 2022 to PC, PS5, and the Xbox Series X and S. SacrifireGame.com is much more likely than those other games to be my type of game. This is coming to PC and consoles December 2022. It's a JRPG in that 2.5D Octopath Traveler visual aesthetic style, and uses a blend of real-time and turn-based combat. It's on Kickstarter right now. It looks like it's probably going to be funded with the time that they have left and what they've got on it so far. And it looks like it could be my cup of tea, but there's still a lot I don't know. I might take a deeper dive into it this week and see maybe if it's worth mentioning in my Best Games and Hidden Gems segment that I do later on this week. But Sacrifire certainly has my attention. Mecha Jammer is another 2.5D RPG with a pixelated style. I think that is kind of like like it's been long enough. When Octopath Traveler came out, I think a bunch of indie studios said, we want to do that look. And now those games are coming out because I'm seeing a number of them this year. And I am not tired of it yet. I think every game that used that aesthetic, I've been kind of a little bit mesmerized by, and it's had me leaning forward in my seat to see the modern lighting effects with the pixelated 2D graphics in a 3D, ish environment. Anyway, this one, though, is a little bit different from some of those others in that it's an isometric perspective, like Baldur's Gate or Diablo, and it's described as an open world RPG, which usually I wouldn't say is the case with like an isometric pixel graphics style game, but open world RPG in a dystopian cyberpunk future. And I would almost describe it, I didn't see them using this marketing term, but garbage punk kind of came to mind, because it looks like they're in a world that has piles of garbage and trash all over the place, still has high-tech stuff. Almost, it reminds me a little bit of the world presented in the movie version of Ready Player One, where there's high technology, but a lot of people are just like living in what looks like garbage dumps. And so I'm very interested in this world and in the gameplay. I want to know a whole lot more. That's Mecha Jammer. And then the last one in the PC gaming show that really had my attention is actually one that I've known about for a while. I've been waiting to get more information, to get my hands on a demo, and I have my hands on a demo now that I'm going to be playing this week, and that's Death Trash. Death Trash is the name of this game. You can get more information at deathtrash.com. This is coming to Steam Early Access on August 5th. It will likely be coming to Xbox because that's where I got the demo. I just recently acquired an Xbox Series X, and they're doing a big event this week, very similar to Steam's event, where a bunch of demos are available. And so I highly recommend you check that out. If you have, it might be on Xbox One as well, but if you have an Xbox One or a Series X or S, then you should be able to get access to all these demos. And so since the demo is on that program, I'm assuming that there are plans for this game to come to at least Xbox, if not also PS4 and Switch. But it's a pixel art kind of game, and it's described as a post-apocalyptic world where cosmic horrors crave humanity but meet punks with shotguns. Influenced by cyberpunk, science fiction, horror, the grotesque, and black humor. And it looks like a very dark, weird game. I mean, the whole... They didn't say H.P. Lovecraft in there, but if you're going to bring cosmic horror into the description, that definitely evokes H.P. Lovecraft. And some of the main imagery for this game is this giant, like red, bloody, squiddish looking monster that your character is facing or interacting with. And so just from the aesthetics alone, and that knowing that it was an RPG, I'm like, okay, I need to try this. And reportedly it plays a bit like classic like isometric Fallout games. So anyway, I will hopefully have more information to share with you later on this week, or on this episode of the podcast if you're listening that way, about Death Trash. Again, more info at deathtrash.com. I also watched the Future Games show. And let's see here. I'll mention Chernobylite. I want more information about this game. It's a dystopian, post-apocalyptic, first-person shooter, survival, horror RPG. All those things kind of mashed together. It's described as a thrilling adventure of survival, conspiracy, horror, love, and obsession. One that will prove to you that it's not about how you face your fears, it's about how you survive them. And so there's some base building elements. I think there's some party interaction type stuff going on. So but I mean, just looking at the gameplay, as a first-person shooter RPG, I'm like, okay, well, if If it's an FPS RPG, then I have a hope of being able to play it. However, it's also described as survival horror. Those games are often predicated on, dying a lot and failing a lot and being really scary. And I don't like genuinely being scared in games. I love the horror genre, but I really get freaked out more than I want to when I'm playing a game, even though I love horror movies. So I don't know, between that, the horror aspect, and the potential difficulty of it, which I have no knowledge about right now, Chernobylite may not be for me, but it was getting mentioned in several different places in stuff that I was watching for E3 this week, and so I think Chernobylite may be a game to kind of to keep an eye on if any of those descriptors interests you. Let's see here. Batora Lost Haven is the only other game in the Future Games show that really grabbed my attention. It's a sci-fi setting with kind of fantasy aesthetic vibes. It's hard to describe. There's like a wizard-looking guy with a steeple hat, but yet it's a sci-fi setting, and it's described as a story-driven action RPG, which already those two things together is pretty unusual, where your conscience will carry the weight of your decisions. You're going to have both physical and mental health bars in this game. So if you run out of physical health, of course you die, but if you run out of mental health, you also die. And so I think that's really interesting. I don't know what could reduce your mental health, if there's going to be stress situations or scary things, if it's going to be like Darkest Dungeon, where you can ultimately get stressed out so much that you have a heart attack or something. I'm interested in it conceptually and, how the mechanics represent those ideas. Let's see here. You acquire and develop both physical and mental powers, and part of the kind of the challenge or the engagement level of the game is in trying to decide, okay, what's appropriate for this moment, to rely on my physical things or my mental things. You're interacting with factions, and which, I think, again, factions in a isometric looking action RPG. They're talking about factions and story driven stuff. Very interesting to me. At a glance, it does look like an isometric Diablo clone, and just from, not aesthetically it has a very dark yet colorful kind of vibe to it, similar to, I can't remember the name of the game that I mentioned in the last video that I made. Anyway, so not aesthetically, it's just that from that perspective and that type of combat at a glance. But until I get hands-on, I won't know if maybe that combat actually feels very different from a Diablo clone type thing. So yeah, interesting aesthetically and conceptually, dark yet colorful. Purple is in. I'm seeing that now, okay? Like, we're going to all look back like they did after the 70s, look back at bell-bottoms and other stuff like that. We're going to say, oh yeah, the early 20s in video games and in movies, purple was in. I think it's part of the resurrection of the 80s aesthetic, but I'm seeing lots of purple, lots of energy, specifically energy blasts and energy spell type things being purple. So I think we're all going to kind of shrug and maybe chuckle about that 5 years from now. Let's see, moving on. Okay, now this was an interesting presentation. Intellivision Amico. This is a console, okay? And Tommy Tellerico is the guy that is kind of heading it up. He's been in the game industry for decades. He said in this thing that he holds the world record for the person involved in the production of the largest number of games. But this is interesting. It's not meant to be a competitor to any other console out on the market. It's meant to be for casual play. And and don't hang up on me. Hear me out. This just because it's interesting. So it's interesting to know about this, I think. It has local play only because they really want to emphasize getting together and being in person with each other, which is something that I can certainly get behind. I think, unfortunately, we are getting relationally more and more distant from each other, and I think especially as believers, we ought to look at Scripture and see the call in there to continue getting together with each other and having in-person relationships that we value, living alongside each other. And so I'm very much in support anytime a video game developer says, hey, I really, this is made only to be played in the same room, And you can have up to 8 people playing, I think many, if not all of their games. It comes with 2 controllers that charge in the very simple-looking dock. What's interesting is your controller, I mean, if this thing takes off, this will be interesting. Otherwise, it's, really not interesting at all. But your controller carries your games on it. So if someone else has an Amico at their house and you've bought some games that you like, you can take your controller over and plug it in, link it with his Amico, and it will allow you and him or her to play all the games that you own that you're bringing over. So even though it's all digitally delivered games, although I think they do have plans for some physical ones too, but primarily digitally delivered games, it still has that sense of sharing your games in person with your friends. The custom controller is interesting. It has a touch screen on it that's full color, like what you would see in many smartphones, and then it has a circular dial that can be rotated around, as you rotate your thumb, or it can be pressed on up, down, left, right, or diagonally and used as a directional pad. So I don't know how that would feel, if that would feel wrong or weird or whatever, but it's certainly an interesting kind of concept. You also have the option of downloading a free app for your smartphone and using your smartphone as a controller as well. So that's how you can pretty easily get 8 people playing some of these games. The games are very simple, but they are highly curated by a team of industry veteran designers. It looks like, from this presentation, he basically recruited a bunch of designers who made great games kind of back in the day. That doesn't mean they're not making games anymore. That may be the case for some of them, but these are he collected designers that made games back when they were simple, easy to pick up and play, and he recruited them, it looks like, to make modern games with that kind of sensibility to them. He was very clear to say that their games have no ads, no loot boxes, none of that kind of stuff that you're going to see. I think what he was getting at is this is not just a console to play mobile games on. This is not going to be a console where you can get on the Apple Store and it's just going to be filled with a glut of crappy games, But it's highly curated games, and they don't have any of that, microtransaction crap. So even though you look at the visuals, you look at some of the clips, and you might say, oh, that looks like a mobile game, I think he wanted to differentiate what they're doing from what you're going to find in the mobile game space. It's marketed to, marketing to gamers, because they're the only ones that are going to be watching this, those and other industry types, but he's marketing it as a kind of a party machine when you have non-gamers come over, or for families with young kids, and that really resonates with me, because I really wanted to introduce Skyrim to my dad a number of months ago. Just like, if you only are aware of kind of one modern game, experience this. Sit down, and he just couldn't control the camera. I had another friend that's about maybe 15, 20 years older than me, who just was not playing games when we transitioned in consoles from 2D to 3D and the sticks and the analog sticks and stuff. And so, if you didn't actually play games during that transitional period, then being given a controller and asked to control the camera with the right analog stick, just really, some people just cannot figure it out. They just cannot get there, And so this would be something that has a bunch of games on it that you could play with people that are in that position, but that might still enjoy enjoying some of your world of gaming with you. The games are also projected to be between $10 and $20, so very inexpensive compared to, and appropriately so, given the simplicity it looks like of these games. It comes packed with, I can't remember how many games on it. I think maybe 12 at least, 12 or 24, I can't remember. But the games for this system are all going to be exclusive, or they're going to be games with exclusive features. And it also includes licensed classic IP and gameplay with modern visual aesthetics. So I can't remember what some of the games were, but they would show some of the classic footage of these games when they were on the original Atari or the arcade, and then show the visual upgrade. It very much reminded me of, say, going from the original Defender in arcades or Atari 2600 to Resogun on the PlayStation 4. It seemed like that, at least that kind of visual upgrade. Maybe not, I don't know how they might have modified or upgraded or modernized the gameplay, but it at least looked like that kind of really neat-looking visual upgrade. And so I think there's potential where this could be a bridge activity where geeks and non-geeks can have fun together. I think that was kind of the selling point in this video, but it's $249, and that seems too steep to me, given the crossover appeal and functionality with the Switch. The Switch is $150 more. Yes, that 150 is very significant, but I think for the person that's thinking long term, the Switch is a better investment than this, because it's going to have a bunch of simple games that you can find that are like this, that are going to be very accessible, that don't require you to control the camera. And I'm not sure about the smartphone thing. That might be where the Amico has an advantage over the Switch, and just like the number of people that can get involved at the same time. So that is a selling point I don't want to neglect kind of hitting on again. But there's also then, with other consoles like the PS4 and the Xbox One, there are games you can buy on those consoles that have smartphone apps that allow you to interface with it, so you can, and party games where you can get a bunch of people that all have their own smartphones involved. And so at $199 or $149, I think the Intellivision Amico would be a great value for those in the market for it. But I still have to ask myself, who is in the market for it? You know, if you have a PS4, an Xbox One, or a Switch, or even a PS3 or an Xbox 360, and are willing to put in the time to look in the digital libraries that those games still have, you can find games that fill the function of these simple, casual party games that the Amico is advertising. Now, if you don't have one of those consoles already, then I would guess that you're either a PC-only player, and in which case maybe this does appeal to you. Like, okay, if I'm going to own one console, this would be the one, you know. But that's a pretty, you know, relatively speaking, small audience. And anybody else, you know, that is not a PC-only player, they're not watching this video, you know. So yeah, again, if you have a console already, I don't think this is going to appeal to you. If you don't have a console, you're not watching this video in all likelihood. So anyway, that's the Intellivision Amico. I'm still very interested. I really like the presentation. He was hitting some notes that were persuading me, but in the end, as I thought about it, like, yeah, I still can't quite figure out who this is going to appeal to. So if this appeals to you, go check out Intellivision Amico, watch the presentation, and then leave me a note in the comments of why it appeals to you and why you might be in the market for it. Okay, moving on. Nintendo. I don't own a Switch. My son does, but I'm not going to plan on trying to hijack his Switch to play games on. Astria Ascending, though, did get my attention. However, this one is coming. It's coming to PS4, PS5, Xbox One, and the Xbox Series X and S, in addition to Switch. It is a side-scrolling JRPG. It reminds me aesthetically a little bit of a Vanillaware game like Dragon's Crown. It has a little bit of that kind of painting look and a slight flash animation vibe to it, which can often be a turn-off for me. But looking at some of the combat, which was very brief, we saw almost no combat footage, but seeing the little that I did, I was like, ooh, that had me sitting forward. I at least want to know more about this game. And although they were only advertising it for Switch, they did confirm that its release date for Switch is this September the 30th. And so on its website, since it lists all those consoles together that it's coming out on, I'm assuming that is likely to be the same release date for when it comes to PlayStation and Xbox. Okay, Metroid Dread. I think there are going to be some Metroid fans that are super excited about this. For the first time in almost 20 years, we are getting a side-scrolling Metroid game in the vein of Metroid, what was the second one called? I didn't follow the Metroid. Super Metroid, the one on Game Boy, and then Metroid Fusion, I think it was called. So initially they put up Metroid 5, just to make it clear, this is in that vein of games, but then the actual title is Metroid Dread. And this is continuing the story arc about Samus Aran's, I don't know how you pronounce her name, relationship to the Metroid species, those pulsing, floating, brainy type creatures. The main character is not Metroid, you know. It's the enemy that she's up against. But unless, as I suspect may have happened at some point in the lore, we find out she's a fusion of human and Metroid or something like that. The reason I say that I suspect that is the developer said this will mark an end to the story arc of Samus Aran's relationship to the Metroid. And he even said after that, I'm hoping fans will wonder what that means. So I'm like, oh my gosh, well, you're not going to end the franchise, and so and you're not going to retitle it to, the Samus series. No, Metroid is the IP, that's the selling point, that's the name recognition. So how can you justify continuing to call the series Metroid if this story arc about her relationship to the Metroid is coming to a close? Well, I think it's because there's something in her that will allow us to think of her as Metroid as the series goes forward. I don't know. That's kind of wild speculation. I played through the first game on NES and really have no other experience with the series beyond that. It's also hoped to be an entry point for new players. There's a prologue that's provided to catch new players up on the story. The gameplay also adds kind of a chase element where Samus is being hunted by a robot that patrols around, and if it sees her and captures her, she basically dies. She's almost certain to die in that encounter. It reminds me a little bit of what I've heard about the Mr. X character that's slowly following you and stalking you throughout one of the Resident Evil games. But you can avoid detection from these robots if you remain still and out of direct view. There's also a temporary invisibility cloak that you can get your hands on that you can use if you're like right in line of sight of this thing. So anyway, I was just kind of excited on behalf of Metroid, classic Metroid fans. So that's called Metroid Dread. Shin Megami Tensei 5 is coming November 12th, exclusively to the Switch, and I have played maybe about half of Shin Megami Tensei 3 Nocturne, which also was up-resed and re-released, remastered on the PlayStation 4, and I'm not sure if it came out on Xbox One as well. But anyway, it's got an interesting, it's kind of a dark, weird, gothic, otherworldly monster-catching game where Tokyo basically blows up horribly, as most Japanese anime stories begin. And then in the aftermath, you're in this otherworldly Tokyo with these strange demons going around, and demons in the Eastern sense, not in the sense of the biblical demon, but as they're treated in Eastern mythology, they're more like fae, I would describe them, where they're like fairies. They can be good, they can be bad, they can be mischievous, So anyway, there's these creatures, these demons that you can recruit to your party, and they'll fight alongside you, and you can rotate them in and out. You can breed them together, and then make new creatures out of them to help you. So that ultimately was why I lost interest in the game. I was like, no, I don't think I want to recruit monsters. I think I want to upgrade my character and let that be the focus. And your character does get upgraded in this series, become more powerful, get abilities and stuff like that. But and I guess I just wanted more of a focus on that and the loot of my main character or characters, and but it does have a cool what's called press turn system, where when you discover the weakness of an enemy, anytime you hit them with what they're weak against, you get another turn for one of your party members immediately after that, and you can just keep that going. Not all of your party members are going to have an ability that the enemy is weak to, so it does eventually, result in the enemy taking their turn. But it's kind of a neat system. I also think that this is a significant visual upgrade from Nocturne. I didn't play the fourth one, Shin Megami Tensei 4, so I don't know how much of an upgrade it is from that game, but the series has a typically simple look in terms of its the textures, and just the design of the enemies is pretty simple, but there's a visual upgrade that I thought brings some nice detail, but without betraying, I think, the original artistic designs and intent of the classic monsters that, yes, do make a return in this game. So, yeah, it's probably not a game I'm ever going to touch, but if I were to sit down and play a Shin Megami Tensei game right now, that would be the one that I would probably have my eye on. You've also still got the demon negotiation system. As I mentioned, you can recruit these enemies into your party. In the middle of combat, you can choose to talk to an enemy, or sometimes they'll strike up conversation with you, and they'll ask you to give them some money or let them take some of your health or something like that. And it seems, I just played a little bit of the remaster of 3 last week, and it seems like the system has almost not changed at all, which is a little bit disappointing. By now, as we're getting to these newer consoles, it would be neat to see your interactions with these creatures being more, I guess, more interactive, more interesting dialogue. Instead, it's just like, hey, I might join your party. Give me 200 gold, Hey, I might join your party. give me some of your hit points. You know, I'm just like, I don't know. I'd be interested if there was a little bit, something that felt a little bit more like actual dialogue back and forth, you know. I did seem to remember there being some of that with a few monsters every now and then, but it certainly wasn't the norm. So anyway, yeah. Looks like a nice treatment and advancement of the series, but not in all the ways that I would really like to pull me in. Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword HD is coming to Switch July 16th. That's coming up pretty fast here. And the Breath of the Wild sequel, they just showed a little bit, teased it really. That's coming in 2022. All right, limited run games. This is a small company, very small company, that basically makes print versions of games that normally wouldn't get print versions. So lots of indie digital-only games will get a cartridge release through limited run games. And so they've been doing a digital event the last, I don't know, couple of years maybe, that kind of showcases what they're putting out. But I like watching it because it reminds me of some games that have, you know, probably all been out for at least a little while already, but the demand has led to, or the interest has led to a physical version being printed. But it just reminds me of like some games that are already out right now that are kind of cool, and I just enjoy that in the season of E3. But they are starting to promote digital games as well. It seems like they're getting involved in digital publishing as well. I'm not sure what's going on there, but there were promos for digital only stuff in the mix with their physical release stuff. And I have to say that with their just kind of like indie pluck and ingenuity, which they already showed some of in previous years, this year they out-Devolvered Devolver Digital in terms of doing something that was kind of like an underdog digital showcase during E3. It starts out with kind of a sketch that felt a little awkward and random to me, but actually pays off, and I found even just a little bit touching at the very end. It kind of is a sketch that bookends the whole presentation. But the rest of it in the middle is this, I think, awesome underdog bad attempt at a direct style presentation, but intentionally bad. It's as if we're seeing the rough cut of the digital presentation that was not meant to go out to public. And so there's all this stuff left in and weird random things. It reminds me a little bit of Space Ghost Coast to Coast now and then. I'm like, this is weird, just like quick editing and random what the crap moments, you know, that were accidentally quote unquote left in the final cut. So I just found it endearing. I found them witty in how it pokes fun at industry news and industry events. So if you're plugged into the video games media, I would recommend giving it a try. I actually got more chuckles out of limited run games presentation than Devolver Digital certainly this year. Anyway, in addition to plugging digital games, the two things that caught my eye were a release of a Castlevania collection, Rondo of Blood, which is the prequel to Castlevania Symphony of the Night, and Symphony of the Night in physical form, and then also the Contra collection. So both of these collections from Konami don't interest me, but I'm thinking to myself, oh, okay, they have to be doing a deal with Konami to get these things out. So Konami in the last, I feel like, year and a half has been showing signs that maybe they're not out. Maybe they're not out and just making pachinko machines as they had been for years. Maybe they're testing the waters with these kinds of things, and they will either make themselves or license out the IP to someone else to make games in properties like Castlevania, which would be really cool. So, and especially in the wake of Metroid Dread, which is a return to the classic 2D gameplay of Metroid, I'm wondering if this is all possibly leading to a world in which we could get a collection of the handheld Castlevania games at least. Let's see here. The final one that I have to comment on is GameSpot's Play for All event, and just two games that caught my attention. The first was El Paso Elsewhere. This is described as a spiritual successor to Max Payne, along with the other games they mentioned, but Max Payne was the inspiration that jumped out at me the most when I watched the clips of it. And it has an original hip-hop soundtrack that speaks to the core emotions and sentiments that motivated the making of this game, namely expressing anger and outrage at the state of racism in the world when being angry as a black man feels off limits in society. So one of the main creators is a black man, and what he was feeling was like, you know, a black person could be president, they can be this, they can be that, but they can't express anger. If they express anger, that just like freaks people out, but yet he's feeling anger, he's feeling outrage at how people like him are being treated, and so he went to this game to find a way to express that maybe would be accepted, would be digestible, and would allow him to kind of put those feelings out there and kind of exercise those feelings. So I'm really curious to play that game and explore that perspective. If the price is right, and if the gameplay is right for me, of course all those things need to fall into place too. But barring any of those things that might get in the way, I'm really curious about that perspective and how it might work itself out in the game. So hopefully they'll have some concessions that allow a crabby player like me to play and enjoy it. The other game is called Rain on Your Parade, which is actually out now on Steam. In this one, you play a cloud in a world that looks like it's made of kind of cardboard, and you control this cloud and move it around and have it rain on people's parades, as it were. You kind of spoil their fun. But then the game seems to kind of morph and shift in unexpected, weird ways and just kind of take you on a strange interactive journey as you're able to rain other things in different circumstances, like rain little hands that can pet a dog. So it doesn't have to be all bad. Or you can rain poison to poison people's crops, or you can rain, what was some other things that you could rain? I can't remember. It's really weird. And they talked about what if you could invade other video games? And so they go into a game that's like Metal Gear, like a classic Metal Gear stealth game. And so you're raining on situations in there to kind of mess up with what the game is supposed to be. And so it seems like it's got kind of a meta level thing going on in the gameplay. I doubt that it'll be something I will personally want to spend money on, but it's something that I just want to see more of. I want to know more about it. I want to hear more about it. So anyway, that's called Rain on Your Parade. All right, and just wrapping up this segment here, I just want to comment a little bit on a little bit of a recurring theme that I was seeing in some of these presentations, and that is the push for diversity in the video game industry. In Ubisoft's presentation in Just Dance, that was being promoted by an LGBTQ plus celebrity that was very kind of central to it and had a kind of an original, a modified song specifically for that video game. There's a Verizon's keynote presentation that promoted the inclusion of women in the video games industry. We had the Life is Strange Remastered collection that was just reminding me that these kinds of some of these themes of LGBTQ plus communities are kind of being played with and presented in games. GameSpot's Play for All event stated at the outset that they were specifically highlighting games that, among other things, have, quote, inclusivity, tolerance, and togetherness at their core, unquote. And so the games industry, or at the very least, games media and marketing, are leaning increasingly into issues of mutual respect and personal identity. And Scripture says a ton about what it means, what it looks like to respect each other. And Scripture has a lot to say about our core identity as humans, what gives us significance and value. And so we as Christian geeks who spend much of our time interacting with both people we know and people we don't online, I think should be occupying some of our thoughts with how we can be present in online interactions about these issues in a way that is not merely heard, but is also considered and persuasive. I think that's a daunting task, and you think, where do we begin? Well, I think even just asking that question, where do I begin? How do I develop, the ability to speak into those situations in a way that's effective? I think those are good questions to ask and pursue answers to. Now, you might think, okay, well, I'm not in those kinds of conversations. Well, we are, in fact, almost certainly already a part of public interactions on these topics. It's important that as we talk about these issues online, make comments about them, it's important we recognize that we are in mixed company. Even on a Christian website or a social media page, even on the Christian Geek Central forums, anybody can come in there and look at those comments and kind of see, what is a Christian online community like? Anybody can check that out. And even more than that, it's important that we stop and enter into, or figure out, try to enter into having real love and compassion for individuals and people groups, instead of merely seeing them as opposition to the kind of world we believe Jesus wants to bring about. And that can be a hard thing because news bites and social media, they just present us with people groups. They say such and such group is doing this now and such group is doing this now. And they just give these broad descriptors of people that are this, people that are that, are doing this and doing that. And it's so easy the way that that news media and social media communicate to lump people and dehumanize people into these groups that they're absorbed into and lose their identity in. But I think the challenge that we need to take on is recognizing that all of those groups are made up of individuals, and entering into genuine love and compassion for those who ideologically oppose us is where Jesus wants us to start before we even open our mouths or put fingers to keyboard. Now, I'll add that I'm in full ideological support of women being given equal opportunities to thrive as both makers and fans of games, and for female characters to be given the same respect as male characters. I think, biblically speaking, this should be a no-brainer, as the male dominance that some Christians in history have perpetuated has been, at least in part, because of their misunderstanding or even willful misrepresentation of Scripture. Now, what I'm going to say next may be a controversial or easily misunderstood statement to some of those in my intended audience of Christians, but I'm also in support of LGBTQ plus characters appearing in games and being treated with the same respect as straight and or binary characters. Even games about imaginary worlds and places are based on parallels to real life. They are not so utterly alien and weird that we cannot relate to them at all. They are intended to have enough in common that we can kind of enter into a fantasy of us being in that world, or relating to a fantasy of a story that's playing out with people that we can recognize as persons, So inclusion of all kinds of characters of different ethnic backgrounds and sexual orientations is appropriate as we're trying to reflect in some ways what's going on and what's true of our world, especially when the frequency and concentration of those representations matches statistical percentages. Now, I think developers are struggling a bit with that right now, leaning toward either disrespectfully representing LGBTQ plus characters or perhaps more frequently overcorrecting and disproportionately populating games with LGBTQ plus characters, and or using them as a tool to teach players lessons about supporting another's pursuit of same-sex relationships. We're in a place where nuance is sadly very rare. It seems to be assumed that we fall into one extreme or the other. We are generally, I've certainly noticed on YouTube, not good at listening to each other. I think back to the marriage counseling session that my wife and I had before we were getting married, just equipping us with some basic skills on connecting with each other, understanding each other, resolving conflict. And one of the things that was brought up that at the time in my early 20-something mind was so weird was that the counselor said to me, "Listen to what Holly says," and then Holly shared something that he asked her to share, and then he said, "And now tell her what she just said." And I said, "Okay, so like just in my own words?" No. Tell her exactly what she just said. Repeat back to her what she just said. And it felt really weird because I'm used to putting things in my own words, expressing myself my own way, But what they were getting at was developing the skill of actually listening and retaining exactly what the other person did say, not what they didn't say, not filling in the gaps with what you assume they're getting at, but listening to what they actually say and responding to that, and not to anything else that you inadvertently kind of stick in there, And that we're in a place right now where, gosh, that just does not seem to be a skill set that many of us have or are interested in developing. And so I think as Christians, we ought to be the first ones that develop that skill, to listen and to react based on the words that are actually used, not on the assumptions or the baggage that we might kind of throw in there that we assume to be true about what's being said or about the person that's saying them. So, but yeah, we just have to be prepared for that reality that we're going to be assumed that we fall into one extreme or the other of two extreme positions, no matter what the controversial topic may be. I'm hoping that things will level out in the coming years as people slowly wake up and realize, hey, we can't keep doing this. We've got to figure out a way to talk. But I think in the current climate, when making comments in publicly accessible places online, we need to figure out how to more and more let love and sensitivity guide every word that we put out there and the tone that we use to communicate. Truth and love are not opposite ends of one spectrum. It's not truth or love. It's not you have more truth, you're going to have less love, or it's not either of those. They are elements we are commanded to bring to bear equally when interacting with others. Scripture commands us to bring both to bear equally when interacting with others. So there is a way in which we can do both without compromising either. And that's what we need to pursue learning and humbly realize, crap, I don't know how to do that. And then walk alongside somebody that's more mature than we are and learn more and more how to do that. And also behind every movement, and more importantly, every individual we disagree with, or that maybe yells at us, or that we find irritating or even infuriating, behind all of those is a hidden heart's cry to be loved, to have hope, or to have meaning, or to feel significance, to feel valued. And I don't want to miss that. Even if I'm being distracted by the other things about this person that's rubbing me the wrong way, I do not want to let that distract me from the heart cry that is hidden from me, that I can only speculate on, but I know is there, because that's just how we are. We don't get angry without wanting something that we really feel like we should have, you know. So we should be interested, I think, in hearing those stories and having compassion for the pain and longing people feel, no matter what we may think of or assume about how they arrived at that pain and longing. We want to develop compassion for the pain and longing itself that people feel. We've got to figure out how to love every kind of person, so that we can help a world that's trying to redefine love right now understand through our love of them, long before our attempts to teach, what love really is, especially the agape love, the self-sacrificing, self-giving love of Jesus. All right, those are all my thoughts for now. Stay tuned if you are a patron of any tier over at patreon.com/SpiritBlade Productions, because tomorrow, well, actually, no, I don't know when this is going up. I'm recording this on a Tuesday, but on the 16th and maybe bleeding into the 17th, I'm going to be streaming a bunch of these demos that I've downloaded during E3 that you'll be able to watch with me. I'm not going to be making them into content. I won't be doing anything, interesting and stuff, so they're not going to go on the main channel, the main Christian Geek Central channel. But if you're a patron at $1 or higher, you can tune in live, ask me questions about the games while I play them. And so I'd love for you to be a part of that with me if you would like. And then later on this week, I'll be sharing my best games and hidden gems of E3 2021. Hope you will come back for that. That's all for now. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye. The Christian Geek Central podcast is the longest-running podcast for Christian geeks, with over 600 weekly episodes and counting, featuring audio versions of much of the same content you'll find here, plus exclusive content including weekly news updates from the creators of Christian comics, novels, and video games, debriefing and commentary about what I've been playing, reading, and watching, and my expanded responses to your comments and questions via YouTube, email, or the Christian Geek Central forums. And now, with timestamps, so you can jump straight to the segments you want to hear most. Get the Christian Geek Central podcast today on iTunes and other podcast services, and enjoy one more way you can geek out and seek the truth.